Sex Education Season 4 has just been released, and it's safe to say that in the short time that it's been out, there's been mixed responses over whether or not it was the perfect way for the show to end, with some people loving it and others considering it a terrible finale. A lot of that has come down to the way that the show concluded. Over the course of the 4 seasons of the show, we were teased about a relationship between Otis and Maeve, and also Otis and Ruby. This is considering that Otis had feelings for both of them at different times throughout the show, so it left us with the question in this final season on who he would end up with. Well, I thought I'd explain who he ended up with whilst also giving my opinion on if it was the right choice. So let's get into it. Here is Did Otis End Up with Maeve or Ruby in Sex Education Season 4. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Who did Otis end up with? Well, the short answer to that question is none of them. Otis actually ended up on his own, and the ending was more focused on the impact that he'd made on both of their lives, and the fact that they took a part of him away with them. Let's look at them individually. Maeve. Maeve was the main love interest in this final chapter of the show, and we saw that Otis and her had quite a bit of turbulence and disruption. Otis was struggling with Maeve being in another country, and he was a bit insecure as he didn't know whether or not he could trust her or not. However, he didn't need to worry, because the person that he thought she was getting close to was actually gay. When Maeve returned back to the UK, we saw them essentially pick back up from where they left off, and they were the closest that they'd ever been. Even if there was a slight hiccup to do with Ruby in there. We saw them going on a date together, him being there for her during the death of her mother, and also they admitted that they loved one another, a moment that was really special. They were the beating drum and the heart of the show, and their endgame was something which felt like it was inevitable. However, towards the end of the season, we saw that Maeve spoke with Otis's mother, Jean, and she ultimately convinced her to see the potential that was inside of her, and explained that it was worth her going back to the States to continue studying. This was because it was her passion, and it was an opportunity that she'd never get again, the chance to be with her one true love, writing. So that then meant that Maeve and Otis were going to be separated for good, as Maeve was going to be staying out there and not coming back at all. This was because she felt as though there was nothing holding her in the UK anymore. Her brother had moved on, her mother had died, and she wasn't at any college. So this decision pretty much ruined all chances of them being together for good, and meant that we had the ending of Otis being on his own, looking out of the window and wanting to be with her, but not being able to. Instead, focusing on the impact that he'd made in her life, rather than a happily ever after. Ruby. In terms of Ruby and Otis, the attraction wasn't really there on Otis's side in this season of the show. He saw her as just a friend. But I got the impression that despite the fact that she saw him as a friend and still cared deeply about him, there was a part of her that wanted it to be more. And I feel like she almost wondered what would have been if they were still together. You could sense this by the looks that she was giving him when they were together and the fact that she allowed him to spend time at her house. We saw her offering to be Otis's campaign manager out of the love that she had for him, but also because she wanted to seek revenge on O, a long-term nemesis. We saw Otis and Ruby spending a bit of time together one-on-one when he went round to her house, but nothing ultimately ended up happening. They just fell asleep in the same bed together. During the campaign period, she was ghosted by Otis for 3 days because he was dealing with what was going on with Maeve. But I think that was the time where Ruby realized that she was happy not being with Otis and started the process of removing all romantic feelings, because those 3 days were so different to how it had been before Maeve came back, and it ultimately gave her an insight into what life with him would have been like. It would have been a life where she was essentially second best to Maeve, something she had experienced before and didn't want to do again. This is why I also feel we saw her say to him that she didn't even want to be friends with him right at the end of the season, because she found a new group and she took on board what Eric said, where he said that Otis only ever cared about Maeve and he didn't really care about anything else when she was around. So I don't think she wanted to be around him after the hurt that he'd caused her. Was this the right decision for the ending? Personally, I feel like this was the right decision for the show to make. I understand that they were building towards a will they or won't they for 4 seasons. And to be honest, nobody could have expected this. But the fact that Otis ended up with none of them was rather reflective of real life, and it was quite poetic. I feel we saw strength in Maeve sticking to her core beliefs of wanting to get out of the town that she grew up in, to not let a single person dictate her life with criticism, and to move forward in a positive way. What she had with Otis was special, and the note at the end of the finale really honed in on that. They loved each other, and Otis changed Maeve for the better in allowing her to feel as though she could open up, something that nobody was ever able to do before. With her saying that there was always going to be a piece of Otis inside of her despite the fact that they were going to be on other sides of the pond, living in 2 different time zones, and moving on with their lives individually, it showed that what they had was stronger than a fling or an endgame, so to speak. They both made a profound impact on each other's lives and were always going to be different because of it. A lifelong connection where they would always most likely be in each other's thoughts, something which was represented by them looking out of the window at the same time. So I respect that decision. It's deeply romantic. In terms of Otis not getting back with Ruby, I personally think that that was also the right decision for the show to make too. Ruby had her heart broken once before by Otis when he didn't say that he loved her back because Maeve was the person that it seemed as though he cared about more. And with Otis being without Maeve for good, and with it being so fresh, the same cycle would have most likely happened again if they got back together, as Maeve was Otis's true love, not Ruby. So she would have been second best, and I don't feel like the character of Ruby would have ever wanted to have been second best in anything. So it was right to not force them together in the end, because the show's better than that. So ultimately, whilst it broke Otis's heart being without Maeve at the end, and it also broke ours because he ended up with nobody, I think the fact that the show decided to highlight strength and mirrored real life by not just providing a happy ending, it made it a bit more relatable and rounded off the show in a way that meant that the future could be interpreted by any one of us. For example, did Maeve ever return and get back with Otis? Did Otis and Ruby end up together because he was finally able to move on? Maybe. That could be the case because of the open-ended nature of it. So whilst it's disappointing at the moment, I think it stands for something far stronger than them just being together at the end. It was true love with real impact. So, there you have it. Did Otis end up with Maeve or Ruby in Sex Education Season 4? If you want to see more videos such as endings explained, theories and predictions, and character breakdowns, then click on the I button. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. I've also done a full breakdown on the ending of Sex Education Season 4, so you'll find that there too. If you'd like to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, well, X, @BrainPilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. Who do you think Otis should have been with? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.